The morning sunlight filtered gently through the dusty front windows of Waverly Diner, casting a soft ember glow on the faded leather booths and checkerboard floor. It was the kind of light that made the place feel timeless, where the coffee was always hot and the silence spoke louder than words. At booth 5 near the back, Isaiah Brooks sat with quiet purpose. He wore a crisp white shirt tucked into pressed khaki slacks, and a Marine Corps cap rested gently beside his black coffee and a folded copy of the Indianapolis Chronicle. At 68, Isaiah carried himself with the calm presence of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and chosen every day since to live with grace. His hands, roughened by war and time, held the mug with careful steadiness. A Purple Heart pin shimmered faintly on the lapel of his navy windbreaker, its meaning invisible to most. But to those who knew, it whispered of sacrifice. He wasn't famous. He didn't want to be. Isaiah had spent the last 3 decades teaching American history at a local community college. Before that, he'd served 4 tours in Vietnam as a Marine sniper. A man trained in the art of war, now devoted to understanding peace. He came to Waverly Diner every Thursday morning before the city woke up fully to read, reflect, and drink his coffee in silence. That Thursday would be different. At 6:17 a.m., the doorbell jingled, a sharp contrast to the soft clatter of utensils and murmurs of early patrons. 3 young men staggered in, their swagger louder than their footsteps. Chad Montgomery led the trio, a 19-year-old with bleach blonde hair, designer sneakers, and entitlement baked into every gesture. His friends, Liam Caldwell and Bren Mason, followed like shadows. The faint smell of last night's party clung to them. Weed, alcohol, recklessness. They collapsed into the booth behind Isaiah's, laughing too loudly and ignoring the uncomfortable glances from the few early morning diners. Rosa Delgado, the waitress, glanced at Isaiah from the counter, an apologetic look in her eyes. She'd served him for years. She knew his routines, his silence, and his integrity. "Yo," Chad said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Check out Grandpa over there. Probably been sitting here all night nursing one coffee like it's a damn pension check." Liam chuckled, adding, "Bet he's one of those angry vets who talks to himself about the war." Isaiah didn't turn. He slowly folded his newspaper, placed it on the table, and spoke, calmly, evenly, as one might address a class. "Gentlemen," he said without looking back, "you're welcome to your breakfast. All I ask is that you lower your voices so others may enjoy theirs." The words weren't sharp. They weren't confrontational. They were dignified. But to Chad, they felt like an insult, or rather, a challenge. "Oh?" Chad stood up theatrically, turning toward Isaiah. "Did this old black man just try to tell me what to do?" His voice cut through the diner like a switchblade. Conversation ceased. Rosa froze behind the counter. Isaiah turned now, looking up, not with anger, but with the same calm gaze he'd once used to talk frightened soldiers through their first firefight. "I ask for respect," he said, "not submission." Liam pulled out his phone, recording. Brent chimed in. "We're being threatened. Yo, he's getting aggressive." "He's got that look," Chad added, raising his voice even more, "like he's gonna snap." Then into his phone. "Yes, 911? We're at Waverly Diner. A large black man is threatening us. He looks military. Could be armed. Hurry." Isaiah's face didn't change, but inside something dropped. It wasn't fear. It was something colder, heavier. He'd seen this before, in the jungle, in the cities, and now, right here. The sound of sirens arrived less than 4 minutes later. 3 cruisers screeched to a halt. 2 officers burst into the diner, weapons holstered but hands poised. Their eyes scanned the room and landed on Isaiah. He stood slowly, hands visible, calm. "There's been a mistake," one said, but the cuffs clicked around his wrist before the sentence finished. His Marine cap fell to the floor beside the newspaper headline. veterans honored across the state. And just like that, Isaiah Brooks was no longer a hero. He was a suspect. The fluorescent lights in the Marion County Superior Courthouse buzzed overhead, sterile and unblinking. They illuminated everything without warmth. The pale wood of the benches, the gray suits of the lawyers, and the weathered face of Isaiah Brooks, who now sat shackled at the defense table. He wore a state-issued jumpsuit, the number 81294, stenciled across his chest. The Purple Heart and Marine Corps insignia had been taken from him, filed away as evidence. But it wasn't the loss of decoration that weighed on him. It was the quiet knowledge that this courtroom, like so many before it, had already made up its mind. The public defender assigned to his case was Rachel Nguyen, 29 years old, bright-eyed but overwhelmed. This was her first high-profile trial. She carried a briefcase of hastily prepared notes and the weight of knowing the odds were stacked against her. She glanced at Isaiah with a kind of respect that bordered on apology. "They're offering a plea deal," she whispered. 18 months. Probation after 5. Isaiah didn't blink. "For a crime I didn't commit." Rachel hesitated. "It's a bad deal, but a conviction could be 5 years, maybe more." He turned his gaze toward the jury box. 12 people whose eyes flickered over him but never lingered. 10 were white. 1 was Latina. 1 black man sat quietly in the far right seat. His badge read security consultant. Isaiah could already hear the unspoken translation. Not a peer, but a placeholder. At the prosecution's table, District Attorney Victoria Lannister rose. Her navy pantsuit matched the political banners outside. She was running for mayor and needed a case to prove she was tough on crime. Isaiah Brooks, black, disciplined, ex-military, fit her narrative too well. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, pacing with measured control, "this case isn't about race. It's about threats, about 3 young men, students, simply trying to enjoy breakfast." She gestured toward Chad Montgomery, now clean-shaven and suited, flanked by his parents in pearl necklaces and monogram cufflinks. They were targeted by a man who used his size, his training, and his military experience to intimidate and terrify them. Rachel stood to object. "Your Honor, there is no evidence my client made any threats." "Objection sustained," Judge Martin Crawley said dryly before turning back to shuffle papers on his desk. His tone was perfunctory, his face is unreadable. Rachel continued her objections throughout the opening statements, but most were waved off with the same indifference. The judge, a 72-year-old with decades on the bench, prided himself on efficiency. That often meant getting through trials quickly, not fairly. Rachel knew her hands were tied from the start. The judge had ruled Isaiah's military service record inadmissible, stating that commendations and battlefield conduct are irrelevant to charges of civilian misconduct. Yet paradoxically, the prosecution was allowed to mention his training, how he was a Marine sniper, skilled in lethality, as if that made his silence more dangerous. It was a cruel contradiction. His honor excluded, his training weaponized. And then came the media. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the curb. On the evening news, Isaiah's face flashed next to the words, "Veteran accused of terrorizing students." No mention of the Purple Heart. No mention of 30 years of teaching civics and civil rights. Just the mugshot. Just the silhouette of a threat. Meanwhile, Chad and his friends did the talk show circuit, appearing polished and emotional. Chad recounted the terror of being confronted by a large, angry man talking about Vietnam. He even quoted Isaiah, "Boys like you need to learn respect. I know how to teach it." Isaiah never said those words. Rachel tried to fight. She called Maria Rodriguez, the waitress at Waverly Diner. Maria testified calmly and clearly. Mr. Brooks was polite. He asked them to lower their voices. They were the ones who started yelling. But under cross-examination, the prosecution revealed that Maria was undocumented. Would you lie to avoid deportation, they asked. Objection, sustained, but the jury had heard enough. Two other witnesses, one cook, one customer, disappeared before their testimony. Later, it would be revealed they had received anonymous threats. But that day in court, they were just no-shows. And Isaiah, he sat through it all with the same posture he had once held in a sniper's nest, calm, focused, betrayed. He wasn't allowed to speak. Not truly. The court didn't want to hear from the man. They wanted the symbol, a symbol of fear. By the end of the week, Isaiah Brooks had been recast by the court, the media, in a city hungry for a villain as a threat in need of containment. And the question hanging over the courtroom wasn't, what is the truth? It was, how much will he be punished? The intake cell at Pendleton Correctional Facility was barely wider than the bunk it contained. Concrete walls, gray as resignation, hummed with fluorescent light that never turned off. Isaiah Brooks, now stripped of his name and assigned a number, charge 81294, stood barefoot on the cold tile floor as a corrections officer cataloged the last remnants of his civilian life. A worn wedding ring, a folded photograph of his daughter Naomi, and the purple heart medal he had once worn on his lapel. Decorative pin, the officer muttered, logging it as property. The box clicked shut with a finality that felt heavier than any door. Isaiah endured the strip search with stoic indifference. His training as a Marine had prepared him for humiliation, for pain, for being treated as less than human. But nothing, not the battlefield, not the racial slurs he'd endured decades ago, had prepared him for being caged by the country he had nearly died defending. Cell block D Tier 3, the officer barked. Keep your mouth shut and follow orders. You might live longer. Isaiah didn't respond. He simply nodded and stepped into the system. His cellmate was Trey Jenkins, 24, a wiry young man from Gary, Indiana, serving 8 years for armed robbery. Trey had seen enough to know that respect in prison came fast, or not at all. He looked at Isaiah over with casual menace when the older man entered the cell. So they stuck me with somebody's grandpa, he sneered. Isaiah didn't flinch. He calmly made the bunk with tight corners, just as he had done in jungle outposts decades ago. After a long silence, he said quietly, "They say I threatened 3 college boys for talking too loudly." Trey raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" "They say I'm dangerous," Isaiah added. Trey leaned back, nodding slowly. "Aren't we all? In here, they make sure we are." But something shifted that night. Trey watched as Isaiah prayed before lights out, as he moved with the deliberate grace of a man whose anger had long been replaced by principle. In the days that followed, Trey would come to call Isaiah Prof, and soon the rest of the block followed suit. Word spread fast in Pendleton. He's the one who fought in Vietnam. Used to teach history, real calm type. Didn't raise his voice when they sentenced him. In the coded language of prison life, Isaiah's silence was strength. He kept to himself but never shrank. He rose before dawn each day, did slow, measured push-ups beside his bunk, and read books from the prison library like they were weapons he was sharpening. What stunned the other inmates wasn't how tough he was, it was how centered he remained. He volunteered to tutor in the GED program. He helped others write letters home. He listened more than he spoke. In a place built to break men, Isaiah refused to be broken. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, his daughter Naomi fought an uphill battle. She had emptied her savings, borrowed against her home in Chicago, and hired a former Marine-turned-appellate attorney, David Harrison. Tough, meticulous, angry. "This whole case stinks," Harrison told her after reviewing court records. The prosecutor used his military training against him, but blocked every attempt to show his service. That's unconstitutional. At minimum, it's immoral. Naomi nodded, holding back tears. "Can you fix it?" I can try, he said, but appeals move slowly. We'll need something bigger. Someone bigger. That something came in a plain white envelope, delivered to a dusty newsroom in downtown Indianapolis. Inside were three documents: a copy of Isaiah Brooks's Medal of Honor recommendation from 1973, a witness statement from Captain Thomas Sterling praising Isaiah's actions during an ambush in Vietnam, a memo marked confidential, noting that Brooks's nomination had been shelved due to optics and race-related concerns. The journalist who opened the envelope, Melissa Reyes, didn't blink. She picked up the phone. "We've got a story," she whispered. And far away, in a modest cell under flickering lights, Isaiah sat cross-legged, tutoring a young inmate in U.S. history. "What's this say?" the man asked, pointing to a line in the Constitution. Isaiah read aloud, "With liberty and justice for all." He paused, then looked up and smiled sadly. Still waiting on that part. At precisely 6:47 a.m., as the first golden streaks of morning sun spilled across downtown Indianapolis, a Black Hawk helicopter descended onto the courthouse parking lot with military precision. Its rotors sent legal briefs and coffee cups flying from reporters' hands as they scrambled toward the barricades. From the aircraft emerged a tall, silver-haired figure in full Army dress uniform. General Thomas Sterling, retired four-star general, bearing 38 years of service and a face etched by duty. He carried a leather briefcase handcuffed to his wrist and walked with the deliberate weight of a man about to correct history. He wasn't here to offer a statement. He was here to deliver justice. Inside the courtroom, Judge Martin Crowley sat behind his elevated bench, his usually stern face taut with something approaching unease. He'd received a direct call from the governor's office at 5:30 a.m., informing him that new federally authenticated evidence required an emergency hearing. In the gallery, journalists, veterans, law students, and civil rights advocates filled every pew. Outside, thousands had gathered, holding signs that read, "Free Isaiah Brooks a medal, not a mugshot." Justice delayed is justice denied. Isaiah's daughter, Naomi, stood quietly near the defense table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had not seen her father in 2 weeks since his transfer to maximum security, but she believed in this moment, believed in the man about to walk through the double doors, and then he did. The courtroom stood in silence as General Sterling entered, flanked by two Pentagon officials. He nodded respectfully to the judge, approached the bench, and requested to testify under oath. "I am here," he began, voice steady and commanding, "to correct the record of a man who not only saved my life, but upheld every principle this flag represents, even when this country failed him." Sterling described in precise military cadence the events of March 26, 1973, reconnaissance mission near the Cambodian border, an ambush. 37 soldiers were pinned down. Outside the courthouse, the crowd exploded into applause as Isaiah stepped into the sunlight, flanked by fellow veterans. A banner unfurled across the crowd. "Welcome home, Corporal." The Rose Garden ceremony at the White House was solemn, quiet, and bathed in late spring sunlight. Rows of chairs lined the manicured lawn, filled with lawmakers, veterans, students, and reporters. But all eyes were fixed in one man, Isaiah Brooks, as he stepped to the podium wearing a tailored Navy suit, his military cap finally back in its rightful place. On his chest, gleaming beneath the morning sun, hung the Congressional Medal of Honor, draped around his neck minutes earlier by the president himself. The crowd stood in silence as the president described Corporal Brooks's heroism, how, against overwhelming odds in 1973, he had saved 37 lives in the jungle of Cambodia, then spent 50 years carrying a burden of injustice in silence. "Corporal Brooks," the president said, his voice firm but reverent, "your country sees you, and your country apologizes." But Isaiah Brooks didn't smile. Not fully. He looked across the crowd, past the applause, past the cameras, and found his daughter, Naomi, her hands over her mouth, tears streaming. He gave her a quiet nod. That was the only acknowledgement he needed. In the months that followed his exoneration, Isaiah turned down nearly every book deal, every television special, every lucrative speaking offer. "I didn't survive war, prison, and silence to become a brand," he told a journalist. "I came back to teach." True to his word, Isaiah returned to teaching, this time not in a college classroom, but across the country. Through the newly founded Brooks Foundation for Veterans Justice, he helped overturn wrongful convictions of former servicemen and women, many of them poor, Black, or Latino, whose records had been twisted into threats by prosecutors hungry for convictions. His first foundation project funded the appeal of Marcus Owens, a Gulf War veteran sentenced to 15 years after a fabricated road rage incident. The charges were overturned within 9 months. Another success came when the foundation exposed a pattern of discriminatory jury selection in 3 rural Indiana counties, an investigation that led to federal oversight and the forced resignation of a sitting judge. Isaiah never sought revenge. He sought restoration. And yet, he did return to Waverly Diner once. 1 year to the day after his arrest, Isaiah walked through the door just after dawn. The morning light poured in through the same dusty windows. The booth where he had once sat with his paper and coffee now bore a small brass plaque that read, "Reserved in honor of Isaiah Brooks. Truth stands tall." Rosa Delgado, now assistant manager, met him with quiet tears. "It took us too long," she whispered. Isaiah smiled, shook his head. It took just long enough. He sat down, ordered his usual black coffee, and unfolded the Indianapolis Chronicle. The front page headline read, "Veteran Justice Act passes Senate with unanimous vote." The bill, written largely in response to Isaiah's case, mandated that military service be considered admissible character evidence in all criminal trials involving veterans. It also required bias awareness training for state prosecutors and created funding for independent legal review panels in wrongful conviction cases. Naomi, now a licensed civil rights attorney, had testified before Congress in support of the bill. Her voice had shaken. Her message had not. That morning, a group of high school students entered the diner on a field trip for local government. When they noticed Isaiah, their teacher approached shyly. "Mr. Brooks, they've been studying your case. Would you mind saying something?" Isaiah stood slowly, looked at the students, Black, white, Latino, Asian, every one of them watching, waiting, trying to understand the kind of world they were inheriting. He folded his hands in front of him. "I once believed that service alone would earn respect," he began. "That if you gave this country your loyalty, it would give you back its protection. But that's not always true." He let the silence settle. "Justice," he said slowly, "isn't automatic. It's something we build, brick by brick, truth by truth, and it takes people like you to hold the mortar." He looked toward the booth he had once been dragged from in handcuffs. "I'm not here because I fought harder than others. I'm here because people refuse to stop fighting for me. My daughter, my brothers in uniform, a general who remembered, and strangers who decided that silence was no longer acceptable." He paused. "You don't need medals to be brave. You need integrity when it's easier to stay quiet." Final reflection. The lesson. The story of Isaiah Brooks is not just a triumph of one man. It is an indictment of a system and a mirror held up to a society that often chooses comfort over truth. It teaches us that dignity is not a gift, but a posture we must claim, even when the world refuses to acknowledge it. We learn that patriotism is not proven by uniform alone, but by the values we carry after the war is over. Justice delayed is still a wound, but when truth finds its voice, it can heal even the deepest scars. And most of all, that no one stands alone if enough of us are willing to listen, speak up, and act. In the end, Isaiah Brooks did not win by shouting. He won by standing still, with truth at his side, and letting the world catch up.